slide, please.
Oh, okay. All right. There you go.
As far as we know, Vermeer never left the city of Delft, where he was born in 1632, the second child of a family which was fairly prosperous. His father was a weaver of very fine materials that made it possible for him to eventually own a large house with an inn where he created a gallery of paintings, which may have been the reason why the young Vermeer became an artist. We don't know why. But let's look briefly here at Vermeer's view of Delft. It's one of the very few landscapes, well, cityscapes really, that he created. So the composition is divided into 4 horizontal bands, and you notice that the sky takes up more than half of the painting. And if we could have the next slide, please. These details give you, I hope, some idea of, at this point in Vermeer's life, which is about halfway through his mature painting career, some idea of the softness of his brush, which you see manifest in the sky, and then the I'll call it kind of the pointillism that he used to emphasize, as you can see in that in that boat there, emphasize the activity of light and color, as well as extraordinarily what do I want to say? Well, organized is just a mild word for his compositions. He manipulated objects in ways that look particularly natural, but simply aren't. He made some changes here to this cityscape and seascape landscape. But let's look briefly at the larger detail, and you can see that his brush here is quite suggestive. The figures who are going about their activities in the early morning, we know it's the early morning because of a clock tower which registers the hour, are, you know, quite painterly, which means that they've been created in a suggestive manner. Next slide, please.
I learned this from Vanna White, you know.
Vermeer originally wanted to be a history painter. I mean, didn't all artists at the time want to paint subjects having to do with history and also religion? And by the way, he was married in 1653 and inherited a mother-in-law who was quite adamant about the fact that as he was a Protestant, he should convert to Catholicism. So 2 years before he painted this really magnificent work of Christ in the house of Mary and Martha, he became a practicing Catholic. And that finds expression in others of his paintings. But in any event, really quite briefly, just to show you how he painted early on in his career, broad strokes, a lot of detail. And this painting is quite large, I understand, in that the figures are life-size, which is so unusual for his subsequent work. We think it was probably commissioned. Next slide, please. Now, the next few slides are my way of helping you see, in particular, one aspect of Vermeer's paintings, and that is it has to do with his use of perspective. And if you're not familiar with what that means, a couple of slides subsequently, I hope, will elucidate that for you. What you're looking at again, is an early painting of his. There's lots to be said about this work. It's a masterpiece of color, of placement, of relationship between these two figures, the servant girl and the handsome officer. This is a relationship that you see in many of Vermeer's paintings, and it has to do eventually in some of the works, quite clearly with seduction and love and amorous pursuits. In any event, we see the back of this officer foreshortened, which means that Vermeer, as you can see in the detail, has manipulated this method of organizing space, basically, and figures within it. Now, those lines that you see are called orthogonals. Vermeer was very creative in his use of perspective, and let's have the next slide so you can see how perspective was originally used. And this is the painting which qualifies as the very first work to ever use one is called one-point linear perspective. Next slide, please. And the orthogonals that you see in pink head towards the visage of Christ. He's surrounded by his followers and the tax collectors asking him for money. But my point is this is a very simple use of linear perspective, as historic as it is, in that the figures are in the foreground, and then there is a background, which also is controlled by perspective. Nothing quite as, let's say, creative as Vermeer's use, as we'll see again in a couple of other examples. Next slide, please. And Perugino, in his Christ giving of the keys to St. Peter in the Sistine Chapel, also uses perspective in a very, simple but important manner, in that it creates a sense of depth, but in which we see the figures, different sizes, different distances from us, but it's nothing as creative as Vermeer's usage. Next slide, please. Another early painting of his, which, much can be said about this work, as it introduces us to the kinds of subjects that Vermeer is famous for. He chose to revolve, I guess you could say, his career around the painting of such genre scenes because they were popular and they were created on a relatively small scale so that they would be perfect for persons to hang in their homes. And painting such works created for him an income, although moving ahead a number of years. When he died in 1675, he died penniless, with some say 10, some say 11 children, and a wife to then deal with that situation. But in any event, here we have an early example of his love for the common person, and especially the common woman. But getting back to perspective, next slide, please. You can read what you wish to on this page, but it's the only example of the perspective drawn out for us that I could find. And there's a pinpoint just above her wrist, and the entirety of the composition is organized around and within that perspective. Next slide, please. You'll see this work again, as it's one of Vermeer's more exquisite compositions. On the far left, you see again orthogonals pointing to what we call the vanishing point. And that red line, can you see that? That's called the horizon line, which I should have identified for you previously. But what is fascinating here, among many other things, is that the vanishing point is at the very end, at the very point of her small finger, the hand that holds the balance. Behind her, just a couple of more words about this composition, is an image of the Last Judgment. And morality issues enter into a number of Vermeer's paintings, perhaps because of his conversion to Catholicism, but in any event, they do. So here she's holding something worldly, gold, pearls, perfectly in balance, and behind her is the Last Judgment. In contrast to her worldly pursuits is what perhaps awaits her upon her death. Okay. Next slide, please.
Well, here we go. Sorry.
The girl with the wine glass I included here because I thought it was just absolutely charming. And it has to do, of course, with seduction, but who, as commentators I relied upon here, say, who is seducing whom? This young woman looks out at us knowingly, it seems, regarding what her state is. But in any event, it's an early example of the kind of subject that Vermeer was famous for. Now, getting back to the moralizing issue that one finds in his paintings, in that glass window, which is part and parcel of most every one of his paintings, as we'll see. The light flooding in, the light, the cold light, the white light of the north flooding in and manipulated by the artist in many creative ways. In any event, the stained glass is an image of temperance. So, be careful. And so perhaps the stained glass is speaking to the woman, is speaking to the man. The fella in the rear of the painting may be a self-portrait of the artist, we don't know. But in any event, he's not involved at all, as you can see. And many of Vermeer's paintings, as this one and the ones before, have narratives, but like another painter I'm very fond of, an American painter, Vermeer suggests what may be going on. He does not tell us. He lets us figure it out or interpret on our own, which is one of the delightful elements of his characteristics of his painting. Next slide, please. This work, getting back to the exhibit in Amsterdam, as I understand it, was hung in a room all by itself, darkened with curtains, something like the curtain that you see here, the trompe-l'oeil curtain, the fool the eye curtain, beyond which we see the rest of the painting, as one of the gems that the curators thought needed to have its own particular ambiance. Now let's have the next slide. Until recently, that Cupid was absent from this painting. Someone decided, I guess, that it did not belong, it was lewd, it was not appropriate, who knows? But a recent cleaning restored the painting. And so it's quite clear, and you'll see this figure again, it's quite clear that the letter that this woman is reading is a love letter, has amorous amorous meaning. I don't know, something like that. And could we go back to the full view? Thank you.
Sure.
And then so characteristic of Vermeer and his manipulation of light and also shadow. But do you see her reflection in the window as she looks down at the letter? So you get an even, if you look closely, an even better sense of perhaps what she's thinking as she reads those amorous words, I guess you could say. So next two, please. The virginal is an instrument that one finds in several of Vermeer's paintings. He never owned one, we understand, and such a virginal as this would have been owned only by someone of considerable wealth. In any event, here's that little Cupid standing above this woman who looks out at us, which is an unusual gesture, although we saw this in the woman with the wine glass. But usually his main characters are self-absorbed, but for one of his most famous paintings that we'll get to at the end here. Let's move on. The music lesson, as you can see, includes not only a woman at a virginal, but a young man. Is this a music lesson? Or is this an amorous tete-a-tete? It depends upon whom you read and what interpretation is given to the painting. But you want to notice in the mirror above the virginal, not only, again, as in the reflection in the window, do we see the woman's face and have some idea of perhaps what she's thinking, feeling, if you look closely. But above her, so behind her, above her, is an easel which belongs to the artist. So he has included himself in that very clever way in this painting. There's so much to say about this work. The tapestry covered tables, which we see so often in his paintings, that create a space beyond us that excludes us, actually. And that viola on the floor also isolates the figures from us. We're not allowed in. We're allowed to look, but we're not allowed in. The voyeurism, another aspect of Vermeer's art, is quite in evidence here. Next, please. I had to include this work wherever it is in this world. I was an intern for a year at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum before the theft. And so I became quite fond of this work. But apart from that, again, we see, is this a music lesson? A woman singing, a woman playing at the virginal, a man. Isn't it interesting that often these men, well-dressed, as if they're just stopping in as passers-by, who knows, is faceless. The young woman with a water pitcher. I want to share with you, and I don't want to bore you, but I found this description. Now, if I can find it in my pile of notes here. Here we go. Which is applicable to so many of Vermeer's paintings and beyond anything I could possibly express. So here we go. And keep in mind that this is a later painting of his from the mid-60s. Much as a poet who searches for the essence of reality, Vermeer created his images by distilling his visual impressions of the physical world. The artist found that beneath the accidents of nature, there exists a realm infused with harmony and order. His genius rests in giving visual form to that realm and in revealing moments of human existence. Vermeer sought and found that inner harmony in everyday life, primarily in the confines of a private chamber. Within the world of his interiors, individual objects, chairs, tables, walls, maps, or window frames become vehicles for creating a sense of nature's underlying order. The poetry of Vermeer's vision is nowhere better seen than in this painting. That's enough. Next, please.
Next one.
And all of that pertains as well to this equally subtle, and I think you could say in the way in which this woman has been positioned and in profile in a very formal manner and kind of monumental in its overall character. Again, this is from the 60s. This is important. His blues, of course, he's famous for his blues, are modulated beautifully here, very soft. Here in the mid-60s, he begins painting with less strident detail and with more attention to the softness of textures such as skin and the satin of that that jacket. Next, please. This is another, I would say, of his famous letters, and I'm sorry, of his famous paintings having to do with reading love letters. And here we see the mistress who's just received a letter. Apparently, she doesn't know exactly what to make of it as she looks up at her maid. And you see them at a remove through a doorway. We are not allowed in. This is one of his paintings, which makes it quite clear that we're the outsider, literally the outsider. Next detail, please, or next slide, please. So here we see what in part impedes our journey into that space. Next, please. And then as we get a little closer to this figure, something else is apparent. And it is the fact that she is wearing a large pendant pearl earring and pearls around her neck. And I think it looks like pearls in her hair as well. Interestingly enough, in the mid-60s, many of his women, and this is just one of several examples, I'll show you a couple of others, begin being adorned in this manner. And also this jacket that she wears, satin with the ermine trim, was actually a garment that belonged apparently to Vermeer's wife because it was found in the inventory taken after his death. Next, please. And writing letters is another subject that Vermeer took very seriously and clearly enjoyed representing. This woman wears the same garment as the woman you saw just before this. And what I want you to see is, next, please, this detail. I'm sorry, it's fuzzier than I wanted it to be, but it was the only detail that I could find of her head. Look at those pearls and look at the way the light helps us understand them, and the light gives them shape, first of all, and also the ribbons in her hair, very subtle. Next, please. Now, before we embark on a conversation over the girl with the pearl earring, I did not want to leave out two paintings that Vermeer created in the late 60s, as you can see, 1668, the next is 68, 69, which clearly represent his interest in science, but also, as one of my sources says quite well, the 17th century was a century of, as we know, of discovery and of discovery of lands unknown to Europe and of scientific discoveries, and so on and so forth. And so this painting, The Astronomer, and the next painting, please, The Geographer, represent that and so much more, along with, as I said before, Vermeer's own interest in science and scientific matters. Apparently, he didn't really know very much about such things. And it suggested that since these two men, the astronomer and the geographer, were modeled after the same person, that perhaps that person helped him with the compositions in terms of what should be contained within them. But in any event, they are at a remove from his other works, needless to say, in terms of subject, but not necessarily in composition, organization, color, light, and so forth. Next, please. This image of a girl with a red hat is very similar to the girl with the pearl earring, in that she looks out at us directly. Her face is lighted softly, but in this case, which is different from the other painting, Girl with the Pearl Earring, dramatically. And the backdrop here is that of a tapestry, but she wears pearls, and blue is a prominent color here, as you'll see it is in Girl with a Pearl Earring. But another aspect of this work is a reason for me to have included it here. And just briefly, Charles Seymour, any art historians in the audience there know that name, one of the great art historians of the 20th century, studied this painting, and he was quite sure, next slide please, that a camera obscura had been used by Vermeer to help him work out the composition. Now, this is an object that many have said, who have studied Vermeer, that he used quite often. I don't know that that's the case, but in any event, Charles Seymour tells us that he was using this in order to create the woman with the red hat. Next, please. And finally, Girl with a Pearl Earring, an extraordinary painting because it is unlike any other of Vermeer's paintings, in that she not only looks out directly at us, but her expression is such that she seems to be, what, imploring us to engage her. Next, please. And again, around about the time this painting was executed, pearls became part of Vermeer's oeuvre in his paintings. So here's another work, which you'll see again in John's presentation, Young Woman with a Pearl Necklace. And again, next slide, please. This lady riding, next, please. And I bring back this image because of the soft, undifferentiated, in terms of linearism, way that Vermeer at this time is creating flesh tones. So you see this in the arm of this woman, for instance. Next, please. and certainly in the face of this image. Of course, as I think you know, we don't know who sat for this work. It was thought perhaps it was Vermeer's daughter, but that proved not to be the case. She wears an exotic turban, not a Dutch costume, ornament by any event. And I think you can see, just one more comment, the painterliness of the execution of the turban. You can see the strokes of paint, not linear, not detailed, but very free and open, color over color. And one more, we have no idea what other painters Vermeer hobnobbed with, paid any attention to, but some think that Schwert's Portrait of a Boy and other such paintings by him, an image, very simple image against a dark background, influenced Vermeer in the creation of his painting, which has become now his most famous gift to all of us. Thank you.
That's it. Okay,
You're on.
I'm on. Well, we could just say goodnight. Thank you. I don't know that I have that much to add. The Girl with a Pearl Earring is clearly one of the most intriguing paintings we know of. So much so that an American author named Tracy Chevalier wrote a novel with the same title, concocting a story which has no, it cannot be verified. There's no factual support to what the narrative states as to who this girl is, what her relationship to Vermeer and his family was. But the novel was a tremendous success, and it subsequently became a very successful movie as well. Tracy Chevalier was born in 1962 in Washington, D.C., attended Oberlin College, and then she went to graduate school in England. And she has lived in England really since graduate school, the University of East Anglia. I'm not sure. I believe she has one or two children, but she's lived in London for many years and has obviously traveled on the continent a great deal. She's written a number of novels. I'm not going to read them all to you. What they have in common, I haven't read all of them. I've read several. What they have in common with Girl with a Pearl Earring is that they are historical novels, and maybe I should interject a personal, shall we say, complaint. I kind of bridle at the attempts to pigeonhole or classify a certain kind of novel. Maybe it's because I'm feeling a little, sometimes I'm feeling like I'm being put upon. People say historical novels sometimes as if that diminishes the whatever accomplishment there is in that particular work, as though, well, it's only a historical novel. A novel is a novel, and the author has the right to depict a particular time period as he or she sees fit, in my opinion. I believe all of these books would be usually called historical novels. Clearly, Tracy Chevalier has great interest in history. Not all, I believe, but most of them most of the main characters are women. She explores what women's roles have been in different time periods throughout history, which I think is a very intriguing approach. Let me interject first that when I taught at Northern Michigan University for a number of years, many semesters I taught an undergraduate course called Good Books, not to be confused with Great Books. I love teaching this course, depending on the student. Some students really enjoyed it, but those who didn't like to read found it rather challenging. This novel, Girl with a Pearl Earring, was probably one of the most popular among the students. And I was determined not to just go with popularity. I would offset it with maybe something by Albert Camus, which would really, balance out the scale, so to speak. The novel is a concoction of Tracy Chevalier's imagination based on viewing the painting by Vermeer. In her story, the girl with the pearl earring is a maid who comes to work in the household of Vermeer. For me, this is a brilliant approach to how to get into a potential narrative that might sort of, if you will, flesh out the story, the painting, I should say. We don't know that she was a maid, as Ellen said. There are some people who suspect that she actually was one of Vermeer's daughters. But in the novel, she is a girl who comes. Her name is Griet, which evidently it's a Dutch name, Griet, I believe. She comes and she lives with his family. And both in the novel and the movie, there's a great deal of tension, and it's a very domestic tension. There's no car chases. There's no, what we often see in American movies and so forth. None of that. It's a very quiet movie. And yet, as the story progresses, the tension truly ratchets up. And I think it's because there's three components that she quite ingeniously draws together. This is a story about how we are affected by art, by love, and by commerce. And art and love, I can see, that those are two elements in the human existence that people have been trying to work together for in many instances in various forms of art and so forth. But also the aspect of commerce is very strong in the story that Tracy Chevalier concocts. Now, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, obviously. If you haven't read the novel, I strongly recommend it. It's written from the first person point of view, Griet's point of view. She is an illiterate young woman, which becomes part of the story toward the end. The relationship between her and Vermeer's wife is very contentious. And there's a very dramatic scene near the end where the wife shouts, she can't even read, as though this just places this girl in, a much lower echelon in experience and so forth. But the fact is that the story that's told from the girl is very subtly, there's a true natural intellect at work from the very beginning. And she is clearly smart enough to understand what Vermeer is trying to do, where the others, the more sophisticated people around her, his patrons, members of his family, so on and so forth, his mother-in-law, who really acts as his agent, they understand what he's doing up to a point, but she really almost is able to climb into the story. And then, again, I think this is the genius of certain novels. Suddenly, the story turns so that Vermeer sees something in this girl that he must put into a painting. And so the latter portion of the story, both in the book and in the movie, is how they came to work together to create this remarkable image of this young girl with this turban and the incredible pearl earring, which really looks almost three-dimensional and lighted. Oh, I should go forward. Thank you very much for reminding me this. Thank you. All right, just a few more minutes. This is a list of the actors who perform in the movie. And I won't read all of them, but you're familiar with all or most of them. Colin Firth, obviously, he plays Vermeer. Very young Scarlett Johansson played Griet. Tom Wilkinson, in my opinion, as fine an actor as there is these days, plays Vermeer's most influential patron, Peter van Ruven, or Riven, I think it's pronounced. And the rest of these characters, they're all based on Vermeer's real life to a certain extent. Again, the girl, Griet, is fictional. So, for example, Peter, who is her young love interest, he's fictional as well. This is an image, obviously, on the left. This is Scarlett Johansson. And later I will show a slide which will place side by side the real painting and this image, which really the movie concludes with this resounding moment when you realize what has been achieved between these two people. And on the right is Colin Firth as Vermeer. And earlier, one of the slides that Ellen was talking about showed this man in the background who has his head turned away. And I'm quite convinced that when they made the movie, they used that as a model for how they wanted Colin Firth to look. The color of his jacket, his lean figure and his hair, his long flowing hair, all of this works to make him a very romantic and mysterious figure, which he is in both the movie and in the novel. One of the reasons why I really love to teach the book with the novel is because, again, in my humble opinion, there are very few books, or I should say, there are very few movies made from books that come close to being a just representation of the book. But in this case, although I still think the book is better and definitely worth reading, the movie does a remarkable job in recreating the story that is in the novel. What the movie has that only your imagination can bring to the book is the visuals. The director and the photographer, the people involved in the photography and so forth, were keenly aware the costumes. Every scene, you could take a still from virtually any moment in this movie, and you would say that's influenced by Vermeer. It's the colors, it's the lighting, it's the shadows. Here are a few more scenes. On the left, this is a moment when Vermeer is piercing her ear lobe so that they can place the earring there. In the middle, this is Van Riven speaking with Vermeer's mother-in-law. They're negotiating over a painting. And you notice all the variations on yellow in this. Certain scenes had dominant colors. They would move from a blue to a yellow to a red, which would alter the emotional impact of that particular scene. And on the right is Greet is with young Peter, who's the son of a butcher. He's just known as Peter the Butcher in the story. He's played by Colin Murphy, who has gone on to considerable success in other films, usually with shorter hair. Here's just a few more images. I won't go through all of them because we do want to move on. We want to have a little time to talk with you all. One thing I will note is the turban. The Greet's hair throughout the story, and I believe that this is consistent with how women's hair was regarded at this point in time in Dutch culture. Young unmarried women did not expose their hair. I think it was considered indecent. There's a very brief moment, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, where Scarlett Johansson is removing her cap, the white cap that she wears throughout the movie, and is about to wrap her head in the blue and yellow turban. And Vermeer sort of sneaks around, looks around the corner to get a look at her hair. And this is as intimate as it gets. There's a lot of sexuality in this movie, and yet everybody is heavily clothed, and there's no heavy breathing, but it still comes through. And this particular moment, when she suddenly realizes he can see her hair, and she at first is aghast, and then she lets him look. It's a very complex moment that's done very well in the film. All right, I'm going to move on, and this is the final slide. In that, as you can see, the posture, the coloring, the lighting is not exact. It can't be exact, but it's not supposed to be. The novel and the movie are certainly just interpretations of the painting, but I've probably read this book and seen this movie more than I've read or seen such works. There are a few others, but I highly recommend them all. Do you have anything you want to add? I think that's the end of the line. Oh, okay. That's thank you. Sponsored by Peter White Public Library.
Marty.
And
Yeah.
and certainly Marty Achatz, our most loved events coordinator. Thank you, Marty. Right. Now, why don't we take a moment? Let me see if I can bring up the images of all you wonderful folks.
Well, I think you have to.
What do I have to hit here?
Stop share.
You could probably hit stop sharing.
All right,
Share,
Or
yeah.
there
stop
we
share.
go.
There
Oh,
you
look
go.
at that. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. All
Yeah.
these people have been here. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to say, Jay McGovern, if I had an eraser, I would have thrown it and nailed you in the back row because I saw you goofing off earlier. Hi, everybody. Thank you for watching. Anybody got a
All right.
comment or a question?
Yeah, you can unmute. You can put it in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah.
If you have a question.
Oh, there's two chats. Let me open that up and see. Oh, this is so sophisticated. Nancy Wynn to everyone. Hi, David. Good to see you and Kim. Okay. And Nellie Cooper. Well, Nellie. Hi, Nellie. And Nellie is a former colleague of mine at NMU, Northern Michigan University. Thank you. I am afraid I have to go, but this is very enjoyable. Well, thank you, Nell. Like everybody else in Marquette, Nell lives about 5 blocks that way. Okay, anybody have a comment or a question? They either type them in or just speak up, but many of you are muted, so please feel free to unmute yourselves.
Many of the women were pregnant. Was that true? And if so, what was the draw to the pregnant women?
The woman in blue reading the letter, Meg.
At least one really looked pregnant.
I think you might be referring to her. And what I did read about that painting is that is strongly suggested that she is pregnant. Yes.
I might add that in the film, the Vermeer's wife is pregnant throughout the movie, and she wears large billowing garments of different colors, and nice garments with ermine or some kind of fur collars. But she's constantly walking around. She's very uncomfortable. So the story in the novel and the film draw from these elements that are clearly in many of Vermeer's paintings. Yes.
I had never seen the painting with the red hat before. That's the first time I've seen that. And
Yeah.
then I saw throughout his paintings, the fur on the clothing.
The ermine, yes.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of fur.
Yes.
That's a
Yeah.
good point. Yeah, and it, allowed him to well, create textures that you just can feel visually. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In Chevalier's novel and in the film, I've always wanted to go to the Netherlands, and I hope to get there one day. I love the light. You feel the cold. Now, here in Marquette and down in Boston, we're all familiar with cold, but you feel a different kind of cold. It's very damp. Although there is some blue sky in the film and in the novel, a lot of days it's overcast. So you can feel that these people, even when they were in their homes, they were always dealing with staying warm. There are fireplaces in virtually every room, but they're wearing very heavy garments. And actually, there's a small series of scenes where Greet is sent out to the apothecary to get some medicines for the mother, and then rather clandestinely, Vermeer asks her to also pick up some painting materials because apothecaries supplied painters with, the raw materials that they made the paints from. And he comments that her shawl is very thin. And Scarlett Johansson in the movie, you really understand that you can see the way she holds her shoulders, that there's a chill that is bone deep. And that comes through in many of the scenes in both the book and the film.
Thank you.
We got a few minutes before 8. Anybody else?
Tell them about this book.
I have something.
Yeah, Kim.
I read in the New York Times about the show in is it Amsterdam? No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, and they were raving about the book of the show, the catalog, but it's the book. So our cat gave it to David for Father's Day.
Oh, great.
And it's
Oh,
this
nice.
book. And it's
Oh, wow.
Wait a
Beautiful.
minute. I'll get it. I
No,
gotta
I
get
know,
it
you're-
into the,
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, how wonderful.
and it's really beautiful and it's thick. And
Yeah.
it's printed in the Netherlands. And it's got all these close-ups and, detail shots. And
Sure,
anyways,
yeah.
and it smells good.
We'll have to find, we'll get one.
Yeah, so.
Well, what a delightful present from your cat.
I know,
Yeah.
he's very thoughtful that way, so.
Yes, indeed.
I had a little trivial thing.
Oh, go ahead.
David has another comment.
Oh,
Yeah, he had art and love and color.
You talked about love and art and commerce.
yeah.
He said, yeah, just love
Wait.
Yeah.
It seems to you that given what about this,
Yes, yes.
the Dutch world is about,
Color and color and listen.
commerce and great distances
Yes.
are reflected in his maps.
Ah.
Oh, good point.
I didn't.
A way of doing landscape, but doing it very formally.
Yes, I hadn't thought of that, David, but that seems to fit certainly. Being the amateur sailor I am, I've read some maritime history, and the Dutch were remarkable explorers at that time. And they sailed the world to bring back, salt, pepper, silks, all those things back to Europe. So that, yeah, I'm sure the maps are all part of that. And maybe one of the beauties of the story that Chevalier attributes to this painting is that here you have a culture that really does look out into the larger world, much as Great Britain did, for a number of centuries. And yet this story is almost completely confined. It very seldom leaves the house, a few times,
Yeah.
but basically the story is confined to the house. And yet, as I said before, there's a very quiet, unspoken tension that continually ratchets up to the point at the end of the movie. And again, I don't want to give things away because you should read the book and see the movie.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, these three elements, love, art, and commerce, kind of come together
Mhm.
in a rather emotional way.
Wait, and also seeing the letters in so many paintings, letters come from the
Yes.
outside.
Yes,
Oh, good point.
yeah.
That's another
So
good point,
letters
are
David.
like
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I should mention, again, much of this is pure speculation. In the novel, and because the movie follows the novel quite closely, not exactly. In the novel, there are negotiations to buy paintings, to commission specific kinds of paintings, so that, a patron will come to Vermeer and say, I want a painting with 3 figures, myself, my wife, and my daughter, or something like that. And they negotiate over the price per figure in the painting, actually. It's really quite amazing. But then the negotiations start to shift, and you realize that there have been times where the negotiations over a painting are also the negotiations where the patron, the male patron, usually much older than a young woman who would be a model in the painting, would be able to have certain allowances with her, if you will.
Certain rights.
Certain rights or allowances. So, those 3 elements really come together in a remarkable way. One last thing I'll say is that the character of Greed, who is the most central character, and I think extremely well drawn, you feel her emotions pulled in different directions, because she develops this great admiration for this mysterious romantic figure who just happens to look like Colin Firth with long hair, which helps, I suppose. I'm told these things. but she also, she's drawn to him because of his, she thinks he's on this plane where art exists. And yet then Van Riven, who comes to the house all the time, he's this, he's this dark, sinister figure, and he wants to grope her and things. And then there's this boy, Peter the butcher's son. Peter the butcher's son is what they call him, who wants her as his wife. So she's pulled by these three men in three very different directions. And as the story progresses, her emotions in regard to all three men, there's a carousel, an emotional carousel that is really very intriguing. Beverly, you had a question, I think.
Yeah, I did. I was wondering if Ellen or you had a chance to research where the ermine came from, because I highly conjecture it came from New France.
Okay.
Somewhere.
I
Yeah,
have no idea.
yeah. You know that that famous painting of Louis XIV with his big ermine coat?
Oh,
Well, I
yes.
know that when I was doing research in that period for my Cadillac book, I know that I discovered that came from the Great Lakes region.
Interesting.
And so the dates are so close, the late 1600s.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
They could very well have come from New France.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which would have added to the kind of richesse that he was trying to achieve in all those paintings with, his fabric and tapestries and so on.
Well, interestingly enough, speaking of Louis XIV, he invaded, I don't know the date, but he invaded Holland. His armies did, and changed the, speaking of commerce, and the welfare of people dramatically. And it's argued that that's why Vermeer died a pauper. I mean, just things changed so badly, or badly for the worse. Yeah. So maybe there's a connection, because that satin jacket doesn't appear until the 60s in his painting.
Right. Yeah.
And then it's many of his sitters wear same, and he owned it. We're quite sure. Yeah. Interesting, Beverly. Thank you.
Yeah.
It looks like
can I just say that for those of you who don't know Beverly and Marty, they live here in Marquette where we are. And we are in the presence of two of the Upper Peninsula has a poet laureate who is selected every year. Marty was poet laureate for about 15 years, Marty?
it felt like it sometimes.
More than one.
Yes.
Okay. And Beverly is our current poet laureate. And the reason that Beverly is so attuned to the potential for a French influence here is because she's from Louisiana and she is splendidly bilingual. She writes poetry both in French and English. Left side of the page is French, which I can't read, and the right side are her beautiful words in English. So
nice.
Thanks for joining us. But just for those of you who don't know them, that's who they are.
It looked like Nancy had her hand up. Nancy, did you have something you wanted to ask?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It was a great presentation, both of you. It's awesome. I totally enjoyed it. I haven't read the book, but I want to now. I think I saw the movie, but I can't remember. So we'll have to watch it again. But what I thought was interesting in your last comment when you were talking about the trilogy and then you talked about the characters, again, it was like, commerce, love, and art are all in those three characters too, which is really kind of cool. But also the seduction of everything is very interesting,
Yes.
And I find that to be really interesting. Someone asked about the pregnancies. You can also see that as fertility. You can see that as another symbol of, being able to reproduce or having the power of reproducing, things like that. I'm not sure which side of it, is it power or is it just, the love of birth or the love of women being able to birth? Who knows? I don't know which side that comes down on. But the last thing I'll say is, he as a technician was amazing. And I think that also, when you had to like sell your wares. I mean, this was his job, So to be able to paint the way that he did with the tapestries and the fur, and then still keep things loose, but also be able to have that tightness is just, I think that's what, besides the emotion and the light, it's just, everybody's just amazed by his technical abilities too.
Absolutely, man.
Nice
Yeah.
job, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Well,
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I
Thanks.
wonder how long it
Thank
took
you.
them to paint a painting.
Well,
Do we
Susan,
know-
we
do-
don't
we don't
know.
know.
We don't know for sure, but the judgment is that since he left to the world, as far as we know, only about 38 some paintings, or maybe more that were lost, a few more that were lost. His procedure was absolutely meticulous. And if you look at any one of his compositions, especially the more mature compositions in the 60s, it's not just the application of paint, but of course, as Nan says, it's just exquisite. But the organization and the relationship of, may I say, part to part and part to whole, he manipulates objects and persons so that the relationship between and among them is absolutely, may I say, perfect. And it can't be any other way in order to achieve the expression, the mood, let's say, that he wishes, whether it's dynamic, which it rarely is, or quiet and introspective. It's not just the painting, it's the organization, and that takes time.
And to go back to the speculation that is the novel and the movie, I haven't mentioned the mother-in-law. Her name is Maria Thins in the novel, which I think is a great name. Maria.
Well,
Thins.
that's her real name.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's her, Maria Thins. I can't think of the name of the actor right now, but she does a remarkable job in the movie. And in the novel, Maria Thins and Greet actually developed this almost not illicit, but they shouldn't understand each other, because Maria Thins is at the head of the household and she's like the lowest maid, Greet is, but they actually eventually start to conspire together. But the question about how quickly Vermeer painted in both the book and the movie, the frustration for Maria Thins, she is his Vermeer's agent. She does all the negotiation. He doesn't want anything to do with that. He just wants to paint. He wants to look out the window and study the color of the sky. And it drives her nuts. She wants him to keep producing because she's counting whatever the currency was back then.
Yeah, it is a fact that Vermeer and his family lived with Maria.
Yeah.
A few years after the marriage. So she was in charge. She was indeed. That's not fiction.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Typical agent.
Yeah. Susan should know.
Ellen
Yeah.
and John, thank you so much. And also, I think maybe this has inspired a trip to Amsterdam.
Oh, wouldn't that be
Always wanted to
wonderful?
go.
It's at the Hague.
Hey,
I think the Rijksmuseum is where we need to go.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree
sounds
with you,
great.
Lindy,
The
absolutely.
Hague.
is that Phyllis Wong's voice I heard? Phyllis? No.
No.
All
Well,
right.
that was me. I'm dying to go. I'm just dying to go on this trip.
Yeah.
Well, if you
Thanks,
can, go to
Cindy.
Amsterdam and send us a postcard.
I
Well,
was just there in Amsterdam.
Or a pearl. Send pearls.
Oh, yeah.
Earrings at the Hague.
Something in ermine.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all.
Thank
for
you
being
all.
Thank
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 you.
you.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
all for coming. And if you want to share this, the video of this should be up within a day or so. So if you wanted
Thank you.
to
Great
view it
job.
again.
I'd love to
Yeah.
share.
Nice to see you
Yeah.
all. Thank you.
Happy
Thank
You
you.
too.
Ciao,
Thank you
ciao.
all for coming tonight.
Buonasera.
Buonasera. Yeah.
Bonne nuit.